Hello my friends, welcome to my corner once again. Today I would like to share with you my thoughts on the film Napoleon by Abel Gance from 1927. The first question you may have is, why are you talking about a film that came out almost a century ago? There are many good reasons, but I think the first or the most important for me is the fact that this movie is included on the Vatican's list of 45 great films of all time. As you may know, this list of films is divided into three categories. We have art, we have values, and then we have religion. Napoleon was included in the art section or category. And I take that to mean that they think Napoleon is an important film in terms of its contribution to cinema as an art form. So to me, it means that it's not really about the content of the film. It's more about all the art that goes into the making of this film. The first thing you may want to know about Napoleon is that this film is 5.5 hours long. So you do need a little bit of free time if you want to embark upon the watching of this wonderful film. Now, it doesn't really feel like 5.5 hours. I am not a big fan of long films, or at least not films that are long just for the sake of being long, because many of my favorite directors actually produced very long films. Tarkovsky is one of them, just to give you a little bit of context here. But after watching Napoleon, if you had asked me, okay, how long was that movie? I would have said, I don't know, 3 hours maybe. So it is very well done and it really involves the viewer. But it is 5.5 hours long, and you do need that time. Now, another thing that is worthy of note is that this was going to be the first part of a series of 6 films that Abel Gance planned to make on the figure of Napoleon only. So we can definitely say that this director was interested in Napoleon. In terms of the time period that the film covers, we're looking at the years 1779 to 1796. So 17 years in the life of Napoleon, roughly from the time that he was 10 years old up to the time that he was 27. To talk a little bit about the structure, to give you an idea of what the whole film looks like, we have a first phase that deals with Napoleon during the French Revolution, a second phase titled The Terror, so dealing with those awful years that came later on, and then before that, before those two phases, we have a little bit of a prelude that shows us 2 important scenes from Napoleon's childhood that shaped him as a person. The film, very interestingly, opens with a snowball fight. You may think that's strange, but it's really not. It really fits into the whole of Napoleon's biography that we see through Abel Gance's eyes. And you know, many people describe the film Napoleon as an epic film. You can see this from the very beginning. That snowball fight is shot in an epic manner. And I think that's wonderful because you can see that little Napoleon took that snowball fight very, very seriously, right? As if it were a real battle. And so did the filmmakers. They filmed this scene so that it would fit Napoleon's perception of it too. But there's another episode right after that where we see Napoleon at school during the learning process per se. And we see him, for instance, feeling awful when his native Corsica is put down as a half-civilized island. That's the way the teacher describes it. At that point, little Napoleon gets up from his seat. It's like he can't contain himself because he feels so insulted by these comments. And then after that, there's an episode in which you see other kids bullying him. An episode with an eagle that really I found to be really poignant. I'm not going to describe it because I don't want to ruin the film for you, but look out for that little episode of the eagle during the prelude of the film. Then we move on to the first phase, right? And the first thing we see is Napoleon at an assembly during the revolution where he meets the composer of the Marseillaise. So he shakes his hand, actually. So an important moment for him. Then we move on to other, episodes from this part of his life. For example, when he went back to his native Corsica and he fought there so that Corsica would not become a part of England. And the culmination of this first phase of the film, Napoleon and the Revolution, has to do with the siege of Toulon, which was very important for Napoleon because the way he distinguished himself during that siege was what allowed him to become the leader of the revolution, something that we see in the second part of the film. Also, something to look out for during this first phase is the assassination of Jean-Paul Marat. And Jean-Paul Marat is played by none other than Antonin Artaud, who was also in The Passion of Joan of Arc, if you remember. He had small parts in these films, but as you can see, this French poet, French theorist, and so many other things, he was not in many films, but the films that he was in were really important. And I think, for what I could see during these, little episodes in which he appears, I think he was a great actor. The killer of Jean-Paul Marat, Charlotte Corday, is played by Abel Gance's wife, actually, Marguerite. And she was also in Jean Epstein's version of The Fall of the House of Usher, which came out the year after Napoleon. Napoleon doesn't appear at the beginning of the second phase of the film. We begin with images of Robespierre and also Saint-Just, who is actually played by Abel Gance, the director of the film. Napoleon enters the scene maybe half an hour into the second phase, and at one point he is about to be executed, so is Josephine. But they get out of that after the tyrants are executed themselves, and right after that Napoleon becomes the leader of the French Revolution. Much of this second phase of the film is concerned with his obsession first and marriage later on to Josephine. So that is one of maybe the focus of this second phase of the film, the emotional or the sentimental life of Napoleon, if we can call it that. He was actually late, and we see this in the film, he was actually late to his marriage ceremony, to his wedding, right? Because he was too busy planning the Italian campaign. And the Italian campaign is the last part of Abel Gance's film. This part is notorious because Gance filmed it using a triptych structure. He used 3 cameras, one on top of the other, and each one was pointed in a different direction. So what you get is really a wide screen, wider than what we call widescreen, right? And the result is just fantastic because the amount of, of time that went into this, all the extras that you can see in these scenes at the very end, it's just simply amazing how they were able to accomplish that in the 1920s, right? So it's really one of the highlights of the film, this ending in 3 parts. From this second phase of the film, the episode that stood out to me has to do with Napoleon's visit to the Assembly. This is right before he leaves for Italy. He decides to stop by the Assembly where he met so many revolutionary leaders in earlier years, right? And he sits down there, the place is completely deserted, and all of a sudden there appear before him all the ghosts of the revolution, the ghosts of the people who were important during that time. They give him his blessing. They say, you have our blessing, but also make sure that you don't betray the ideals of the revolution. There is one particular scene where Napoleon sees Saint-Just, Robespierre, Danton, and the poet André Chenier. And as I was looking at Napoleon, seeing these ghosts right before him, I could not help thinking about the Star Wars film, The Return of the Jedi, where when Luke Skywalker sees the ghosts of his father, Yoda, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't know if this is a direct allusion on the part of, the filmmakers for Star Wars, but it's definitely a connection there when it comes to filmmaking techniques, how you portray these ghostly encounters, right? Now, Napoleon is not available in the US as a US release, so I had to get the edition from the British Film Institute. This edition, as far as I'm concerned, is and will probably remain the authoritative edition because I really cannot think of a single thing that they could do to make it better. It follows Abel Gance's way of presenting the film. One of the things that involves is a color tinting for some of the shots. And to give you the most obvious example is, for instance, for battle sequences, the tinting of the screen of the image is red, right? Obviously, it makes sense. But this is one of the things that the British Film Institute release presents to you. Then there's also an added score by Carl Davis. The score is modern, of course, but it sounds like the kind of music that would accompany a film from the 1920s, from the silent era. And I mean, if you just listen to this music, it's just breathtaking by itself, let alone watching it as you're supposed to, by at the same time as the action is being shown. There are many extras included in the BFI release, but the outstanding one to me was a documentary from 1968 titled The Charm of Dynamite. Narrated actually by director Lindsay Anderson. You may see my copy of If somewhere around here. I think this documentary, I enjoyed it so much because I can actually see and hear Abel Gance. The documentary shows you images from his first films, but you can also see the director speaking about his art, and also footage from when Napoleon was shot, as a kind of behind-the-scenes type of a documentary. I think this is such a great gift, it's to see how films were made in those years, especially a film as epic as Napoleon is. You really get the chance to appreciate all the do-it-yourself type of art that went into it. And to me that was a revelation. I had never seen a documentary like that, and I really enjoyed it. So some concluding thoughts. My final assessment of this film. I think it's one of the best films I have ever seen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As I said before, it is 5.5 hours long, but I did not really feel that I had watched a 5.5 hour film. I divided it into parts, just so you know. So I watched it over 3 days, but I can tell you there was not a single dull moment in all this time. And I would watch it again soon. It's so involving and so inspiring to see this film, regardless of what your opinion of Napoleon is. I don't think I even have an opinion myself specifically about him. I haven't really thought about him that much, or I don't really know as many of the details of his life as I probably should. But that's, a different topic. So, wonderful film, really great in the shooting and the editing. And also I think it's a film that one way or another, directly or indirectly, inspired countless other movies. Many of the war movies that came after it, and also all of those movies that involve some kind of an epic battle sequence or sequences, right? I mentioned before the Star Wars movie. I definitely thought of those while I was watching Napoleon, and also the Lord of the Rings films. So I think this is a very, very influential film, as I said before, directly or indirectly. I hope you enjoyed this video and my 2 cents on Abel Gance's Napoleon. If you want more on films from the Vatican's list, I have shot a video on Alain Cavalier's Thérèse, so that is available already. And as I mentioned at the end of that video, my dream would be to comment on each one of these 45 films, but who knows how long that is going to take, or if I will be able to do it at all. Hopefully, that's my one of my projects here. Now, the only film that I'm missing from the Vatican's list is Ordet by Dreyer. Yes, I have not seen Ordet, but I will remedy that as soon as possible, and hopefully I will be able to share my thoughts on that film with you soon. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.